What happens when Hollywood's most notoriously private legend meets late-night television's most relentless interrogator? You won't believe what unfolds when Harrison Ford sits down with Stephen Colbert for what was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance, but instead becomes the most explosive confrontation in late-night history. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface of Ford's decades-long career finally erupted in spectacular fashion, leaving audiences stunned and crew members scrambling. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when one of cinema's biggest icons reaches his absolute breaking point on live television. The Ed Sullivan Theater was buzzing with anticipation as Harrison Ford made his way to the guest chair, promoting his latest project with what seemed like his usual reluctant charm. The 81-year-old actor had always been known for his prickly relationship with the press, but nothing could have prepared viewers for the verbal warfare that was about to erupt between him and Colbert. From the moment Ford settled into his seat, something felt different. The legendary actor's jaw was set in that familiar grimace, but there was an edge to his demeanor that went beyond his typical interview discomfort. Colbert, sensing an opportunity to push buttons, launched into his opening questions with his characteristic smirk, seemingly unaware that he was about to poke a sleeping bear. "Harrison, great to have you back," Colbert began with that trademark false enthusiasm. "I have to ask, after all these years, do you ever get tired of people asking you about Han Solo and Indiana Jones?" Ford's response came with a coldness that immediately shifted the atmosphere in the studio. "Stephen, I've been doing this for 50 years. If I had $1 for every time someone asked me that exact question, I could buy your network." The audience laughed nervously, but seasoned Colbert watchers could see the host's eyes light up with predatory interest. He leaned forward slightly, sensing weakness. "Well, that's quite an investment portfolio you'd have there. But seriously, you've got to admit, those characters have defined your career more than anything else you've done." The camera caught Ford's hands tightening slightly on the armrests of his chair. His voice dropped to that dangerous growl that moviegoers knew all too well. "Defined my career? That's an interesting way to put it, Stephen. I suppose you'd know all about being defined by a character, wouldn't you? How's that right-wing pundit persona working out for you these days?" The studio fell silent for a beat. Colbert's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered, but the damage was done. Ford had just thrown the first real punch, referencing Colbert's previous Comedy Central character in a way that cut deep. The host's response came with a sharper edge than usual. "Well, at least I retired that character voluntarily," Colbert shot back. "I didn't spend 40 years publicly complaining about the roles that made me a household name and hundreds of millions of dollars." Ford's laugh was bitter and humorless. "Voluntarily? Is that what we're calling it? Because from what I remember, Comedy Central showed you the door, and CBS was desperate enough to take a chance on someone whose biggest qualification was pretending to be someone else for a living." The tension in the room was becoming palpable. Audience members were looking at each other uncertainly, unsure if this was part of some elaborate bit or if they were witnessing something genuinely hostile. Colbert's famous composure was beginning to crack as he realized he'd bitten off more than he could chew with Ford. That's rich coming from someone who's made a career out of mumbling through scripts and looking perpetually constipated on camera. Colbert fired back, his voice taking on a nasty edge that his fans rarely heard. "Tell me, Harrison, when was the last time you actually seemed like you wanted to be in a movie? Because from where I'm sitting, you've been phoning it in since the Clinton administration." Ford's eyes narrowed dangerously. The legendary actor slowly leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that somehow carried throughout the entire theater. "You want to talk about phoning it in, Stephen? Let's talk about a man who built his entire career on mocking conservatives, then spent 5 years kissing up to every liberal politician who'd give him FaceTime. At least when I'm bored, I'm honest about it. You're just a fucking sellout hiding behind a desk." The F-bomb hung in the air like a grenade. The CBS censors were undoubtedly scrambling, but this was live television, and there was no taking it back. Colbert's face had gone red. Whether from anger or embarrassment, it was impossible to tell. His next words came out through clenched teeth. "A sellout? That's fucking hilarious coming from someone who spent the last decade of his career cashing Disney checks while publicly bitching about every single movie he made. You want to talk about integrity? You killed Han Solo because you were too much of a prima donna to keep playing the character that made your career. The gloves were officially off. What had started as typical late-night banter had devolved into something much darker and more personal. Ford stood up slightly in his chair, his famous temper finally reaching its boiling point. But this was only the beginning of what would become the most shocking confrontation in late-night television history. The studio audience sat in stunned silence as Ford's piercing stare bore into Colbert with an intensity that had intimidated directors and co-stars for decades. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of 5 decades of pent-up frustration with Hollywood's publicity machine. You know what your fucking problem is, Stephen? Ford's words cut through the theater like a knife. You think because you've got this little throne behind that desk, you can psychoanalyze everyone who sits across from you. You want to know why I killed Han Solo? Because I was tired of people like you reducing everything I've ever done to one goddamn character. Colbert's face was flushed, but he wasn't backing down. His voice took on that condescending tone that had made him enemies throughout the industry. Oh, boo-hoo, Harrison, cry me a river. You think you're the only actor who's ever been typecast? The difference is, most people have the grace to be grateful for the opportunities that made them rich beyond their wildest dreams. Grateful? Ford's laugh was sharp and bitter. Grateful to be treated like a dancing monkey for 40 years? Grateful to have every conversation, every interview, every public appearance reduced to the same tired fucking questions. You sit there night after night, kissing ass and pretending to be America's sweetheart. But underneath that fake smile, you're just another parasitic media vulture, feeding off other people's work. The production team was clearly in panic mode. Cameras kept rolling, but you could see stage managers frantically gesturing from the wings. This had gone far beyond anything they could control or spin. Colbert, perhaps realizing he had pushed too far, tried to regain some control of the situation. Look, Harrison, maybe we should, what? Ford interrupted, his voice rising. Maybe we should pretend this whole industry isn't built on exploitation. Maybe we should pretend that talk show hosts like you aren't bottom feeders who make their living off manufactured controversy and celebrity humiliation. Colbert's attempt at damage control only seemed to fuel Ford's rage further. The host's next move was perhaps the worst possible choice he could have made. Instead of trying to de-escalate, he doubled down with a sneer that showed his true colors. Listen, Grandpa. I don't know what crawled up your ass and died, but this is my show. If you can't handle a few simple questions without having a senior moment, maybe you should stick to doing voice work for animated movies where nobody has to look at that permanently sour expression. The age comment was the match that lit the dynamite. Ford's face went dark with fury, and when he stood up this time, it was with the full intention of ending this conversation on his terms. His voice dropped to a growl that seemed to echo through the entire theater. Senior moment? You condescending piece of shit. I was making movies before you were even a failed stand-up comic jerking off in Chicago dive bars. You want to talk about senior moments? Let's talk about how your entire career is built on recycling jokes written by 20-something writers while you pretend to be relevant. The audience was completely silent now. Some people visibly uncomfortable, others recording with their phones despite security's best efforts. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a genuine verbal bloodbath between two men who clearly despised each other. Colbert, his composure completely shattered, made what would prove to be his final mistake of the evening. You know what, Harrison? Fuck this. You're an over-the-hill has-been who can't accept that nobody gives a shit about your opinions anymore. The only reason you're even here is because your publicist dragged you kicking and screaming to promote whatever forgettable garbage you're in this month. Ford's response came with deadly calm. And you're a talentless hack who stumbled into a job because you could imitate assholes better than anyone else. The difference is, I know what I am. You're still pretending to be something you're not. Relevant. The confrontation had reached a point of no return. Both men were standing now, Ford towering over the desk while Colbert gripped his chair like a shield. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and everyone in that studio knew they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Get the fuck off my stage, Colbert snarled, abandoning any pretense of professionalism. Ford's smile was cold as ice. With pleasure, you miserable fucking parasite. But as Ford turned to leave, Colbert couldn't resist one final, devastating blow that would push the legendary actor completely over the edge. "Hey, Harrison!" Colbert called out with vicious satisfaction. "Give my regards to Carrie Fisher when you see her. Oh wait, you can't, because unlike her, you're still alive and bitter instead of being remembered as beloved." The mention of his late co-star and dear friend hit Ford like a physical blow. The entire studio gasped audibly at the sheer cruelty of the comment. Ford froze mid-step, his back still to Colbert, his shoulders tensing with barely contained rage. When he slowly turned around, his face was a mask of pure, unbridled fury that sent chills through everyone present. "You sick fuck," Ford whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. "You just crossed a line that can never be uncrossed." The audience was dead silent, many visibly horrified by what they had just witnessed. Even Colbert seemed to realize he had gone too far, but it was too late to take back the words that had just destroyed any remaining shred of decency in their confrontation. Ford began walking back toward the desk with purposeful, measured steps. His voice grew louder with each word, building to a crescendo of righteous anger. "Carrie Fisher was worth 10 of you, you miserable piece of human garbage. She had more talent in her little finger than you'll ever have in your entire pathetic career." Colbert tried to backpedal, suddenly aware that he had awakened something truly dangerous. "Look, I didn't mean—" "Shut your fucking mouth!" Ford roared, his voice echoing through the theater with such force that several audience members actually flinched. "Don't you dare try to walk that back now. You wanted to be a tough guy? You wanted to push buttons? Well, congratulations, Stephen. You just pushed the wrong fucking button." The legendary actor was now standing directly in front of Colbert's desk, his presence dominating the entire stage. His voice dropped to a menacing growl that carried more threat than any shouting could. "Carrie fought her demons every single day and still managed to be kinder and funnier than you could ever dream of being. She would have eaten you alive and done it with more class than you've shown in your entire miserable career." Security personnel were starting to move closer to the stage, but they seemed uncertain about how to handle a situation involving someone of Ford's stature. The actor continued his verbal assault with surgical precision, each word designed to inflict maximum damage. "You want to know what the difference is between me and you, Stephen? I've earned the right to be bitter. I've put in the work, paid my dues, and created characters that will outlive both of us. You're just a court jester who thinks wearing a suit makes you important. You're a fucking nobody who got lucky." Colbert was now visibly shaken, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "Security!" he called out desperately, his voice cracking with panic. Ford laughed, a sound devoid of any humor. "Security? Are you that much of a coward that you need protection from an 81-year-old man? This is Rich. The big tough talk show host can dish it out but can't take it when someone fights back." As security approached, Ford held up his hands in mock surrender. But his verbal assault wasn't finished. "Don't worry, boys, I'm leaving. But Stephen, I want you to remember something. Every night when you go to bed in your fancy house, bought with money you made by humiliating people for entertainment, remember this moment. Remember the night you tried to play with the big boys and got your ass handed to you by a senior citizen." Ford began walking toward the exit, but turned back one final time for the kill shot. "And Stephen, next time you want to invoke a dead woman's name to score cheap points, remember that Carrie Fisher had more integrity in her worst moments than you've ever had in your best. She was real. You're just a character who forgot to stop performing." The audience sat in stunned silence as Ford made his way toward the stage exit. But he wasn't done yet. As he reached the edge of the stage, he turned to address the audience directly, bypassing Colbert entirely. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize that you had to witness this. You came here expecting entertainment, and instead, you got to see what happens when Hollywood's fake politeness gets stripped away. This man," he pointed at Colbert without looking at him, "just showed you who he really is beneath that manufactured charm. Remember that the next time he's pretending to care about decency and kindness on your television screens." With that, Harrison Ford walked off the stage, leaving behind a shell-shocked host, a traumatized audience, and what would undoubtedly become the most talked-about moment in late-night television history. The cameras continued rolling as Colbert sat behind his desk, visibly shaken and unable to form coherent words. The show went to an emergency commercial break that lasted nearly 10 minutes, while producers scrambled to figure out how to handle the aftermath. When they returned, Colbert offered a brief, clearly scripted apology before cutting the show short, claiming technical difficulties. But the damage was done. Harrison Ford had just delivered the most devastating takedown in talk show history, exposing the ugly reality behind the glittering facade of late-night entertainment. The man who had given us Han Solo and Indiana Jones had reminded everyone why he was a legend, not just for the characters he played, but for the authentic, uncompromising man behind them. In a world of manufactured celebrity moments and scripted controversies, Ford's explosive exit was brutally, refreshingly real. He had walked into that studio as a reluctant guest and left as an absolute legend who had single-handedly destroyed one of television's biggest egos. The king of late night had just been dethroned by Hollywood royalty, and every second of it was captured on live television for the world to see.